Hello and welcome. Is Russia trying to steamroll the Ukrainians with an additional 500,000 soldiers? And is the fight about Bakhmut mostly about financial gains for Yevgeny Prigozhin, the creator, owner of Wagner PMC? This and more in this situation report. Ukrainian defense minister has published the numbers of the current Ukrainian estimates of Russian precision-guided missiles. We have it here. You can pause it. It also says in the second column the amount of missiles they have produced since the beginning of the war. As it stands out are the KH-101 and the KH-555 that are with 290 of them being produced. Those are the cruise missiles that are mostly used from the Russian strategic bomber force. Also, caliber is visible, is important here, as an additional 150 of those missiles is also important. The Russians are using them extensively, both from air-launched sites, from land-launched sites, and mostly from sea-launched operations, both in the Caspian Sea, I think, and from the Black Sea. We have the total amount here. As you can see, they expect Russia not to run out anytime soon when it comes to the S-300 that are being used in ground attacks. In general, the numbers here are what Ukraine estimates and gives us an indication according to their own estimates that, for instance, right now only 536 strategic missiles are still available. You can pause the video to see more of those, more of the informations here when it comes, if you're interested. The Russians, there's reports the Russians are now going to set up production facilities for the Shahid loitering munitions themselves, which should be fairly easy to do as they are more or less built out of commercially available parts and are fairly easy to produce. The high shot-down ratio doesn't change the fact that it fixes Ukrainian forces all over the Ukrainian territory in the defense of those drones, of those loitering munitions, and that a few of them still get through, and after shot down, a lot of them still do destruction on the ground as their warhead is not blowing up after having been shot down. When it comes to the Eastern Front, there are reports about heavy fighting, Russian attacks in the direction in the Svatove area and in the direction of Kupiansk, Ukrainian counterattacks, still fighting raging in the area of Kremina. Nothing much has changed here. Ukraine, I cannot observe any proof of change of territory in this region. Ukraine is saying that Russian pioneers have arrived in the Svatove area to blow up the dam. It should be the dam here of the Svatove reservoir. The idea of this is that they would prepare explosives on the dam, and in case of a Ukrainian breakthrough, that dam would probably flood the area and probably make this river here swell up and thus make it more difficult for the Ukrainians to cross it and thus allow the Russians to set up new defensive lines in that case. We have images, as it's always asked, what happened to the BMPT. We have images now from Russian public media where they talk to soldiers in the Svatove area, and we see BMPT here. And as you can see, it clearly has been in combat. It shows some wear and tear. That is a sign of combat. And we have further information about this interesting weapon system being employed in the area. Russia only has a few of them, and it's fairly unique in the world as it is combining more or less, you could probably say, twice the firepower of an infantry fighting vehicle with the chassis of a tank, and thus combines the volume of fire of infantry fighting vehicles with autocannons. As you can see, two of them here with anti-tank guided missiles, with grenade launchers, with the armor of a tank. In this regard, a fairly interesting fighting vehicle, which is only produced in small numbers or only employed in small numbers by the Russians. Some export customers have acquired a bigger amount of them. Further south of the Seversky Donetsk, there are heavy fighting is continuing, mostly around the Bakhmut area, both in the south, in the area of Kurdyumivka, as well as north of it, Soledar Bakhmutske area. Soledar is clearly still seeing Ukrainian presence as of now. The advances of the Russians that that we talked about in the last situation report have stopped. The Ukrainians have managed to stop them. Bakhmut is nowhere closer, or not really closer, of being encircled than it has been before. The defensive lines, while they have crumbled a piece, have held since then. The Russians are saying that they did a revenge attack on Kramatorsk, which is here, in response to the Ukrainian missile strike on Makivka, which was here, which officially killed 89 Russian soldiers, but probably likely killed several hundreds. And the Russians are claiming that 600 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in the strike. The interesting part, though, is the Ukrainians say not a single person has been killed in that attack, and Russian military bloggers that are pro-Russian militants are posting those pictures here on Telegram, where they say we need to talk about the lying by the defense ministry, by the official positions about the destruction. For instance, every Ukrainian Sukhoi 25 has been shot down 4 times by now. They've destroyed, according to Russian government, the Russian armed forces have destroyed more HIMARS than were delivered. And this is the building that was completely destroyed and was killed, where 600 were killed. And you can see that there's some rubble in front of it, that it has probably been missed, that there was even still light inside of it, which shows how little the damage was done here. The interesting part, it was not just post here on Military Informant, but even the big Riba channel that I frequently mention here, because it's one of the biggest and one of the most professional Telegram channels reposted this to give it more audience. So Russian military bloggers are basically ridiculing their own military and their own government for consistently lying in this regard. A Finnish reporter has also been in the place and confirmed the school has been empty, and there are no victims, there are no casualties to be reported. The interesting news now is, it's from last week already, that the American government thinks that Prigozhin has financial interests in the capture, especially of Soledar, when it comes to the salt and gypsum mines that are there. Soledar, as far as I understand it, the name even is a reference to the salt mines that are there. It would kind of make sense in a context that Russia, Putin has with a decree legalized corruption to at least a certain degree. If Prigozhin were to capture the area, that he would claim those mines and would probably get permission to keep them as his personal property, should not be much of a surprise, so it would fit the overall context in this regard. The thing is, though, that Prigozhin himself said that the mines, and it's one of the things where he was talking about it, that they are a formidable defensive position, and they are filled with weapons dating back to World War I, and that makes it so hard to capture. It seems more that his emphasis of the mines seems more to be like an explanation or an excuse for the little progress that Bakhmut made. And the famous, where do I have it? One moment here. Yeah, the fairly famous Igor Strelkov, which is also, like, that's his nickname, his nom de guerre, that he was using when he was part of the Russians that invaded Ukraine in 2014. His real name is Igor Girkin. He's a famous and well-read, often read military blogger in the Russian sphere as well, that we frequently mention here because of his harsh criticism of the own government, not in case that he's unhappy with the war, but because he's such a militant, he's such a radical, that he wants them to do it for real and fight for real. So he's criticizing the own side all the time from the point of an observer who thinks his own government doesn't do enough. And that obviously gives us value, because he's well connected both locally as well as within the military, has the military background. I think he's a colonel a former colonel, so he has full military training. He has combat experience in the region, and if he criticizes shortcomings on the Russian side, then we can more or less take it for granted, unless and can take it more or less for face value, unless we believe that he exaggerates weaknesses to force the Russian government to do more, which is always some kind of possibility. But he is mocking Prigozhin in this regard, uh, saying like it was well known that there are mines. One was even producing until 2014. And what is the whole point of this, unless he wants to create some Verdun where both sides are bleeding each other white, where he attacks one of the most defensible positions, one of the most defended positions, head on to create losses. He mentioned like the mines are extensive. Above was a military installation with good defensive, so attacking there is one of the biggest strong points along the whole front, and Wagner is heading in headlong. He thinks that the guns, the weapons there were removed a while ago, so that the amount, I think he says here 10 million weapons that were there are no longer there. But he also says even if Prigozhin wins, and that's the interesting part for us, even if Prigozhin's forces win in Soledar, it might be a tactical victory, but it will be a strategic defeat, because the Wagner forces have suffered massive losses among their best troops, among their strongest troops, and will be permanently weakened after this. Generally, this is a perspective that could play a role in the selection of the point. In the past, we said that Prigozhin probably takes this to build his own image, to show himself being the only one really advancing. And while it's unclear how much of those recent advances in the past weeks have been due to Wagner or due to the potential involvement of the VDV, the Russian air assault units that were reported in the area before, it's still some kind of truth to it that the only one achieving any success as of now is more or less Prigozhin. So in this regard, it will help him to set himself up as a political player within Russia. Among the southern front, we have the usual reports about fortifications. The Russians are continuously building fortifications to obviously protect their southern flank, the land bridge to the Crimea, which would be a strategic defeat should Ukraine be able to capture it. And there is reporting about shelling of areas along the whole front line, not just here, but also obviously in the north, and even again and again over the international border. In this regard, we have something special, because there are reports, at least from the Ukrainian side. I was not able to confirm it, but according to the Ukrainian side, the Russians have used incendiary ammunition, and that should be white phosphorus ammunition that was used in Kherson City, which would be a war crime according to I think the Geneva no, I think it was the Hague land warfare regulation, but I'm not completely sure. But using incendiary weapons in a civilian area, even if they are military targets, is a war crime, because of the immense damage those weapons do. And as they are indiscriminate, it obviously hits civilians to a massive degree. So it's banned. The usage in this regard is banned. When it comes to the mobilization, Vadim Skibitsky, which is the deputy head of the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, is saying that Russia will call up 500,000 men from the 15th of January on. That should be the coming Sunday, I think. Yes, it is. This time, they will also call up massive numbers within Moscow and St. Petersburg, which has been more or less, mostly at least, spared in the past mobilization wave. We will have to see whether the date is true and whether it's going to happen. According to certain reports in some of the oblasts, the first commercial printing installations have already received orders for the paper slips, because the Russian system, at least as of now, still is that you have to hand over a paper slip with the call up to be called to arms personally by someone to you personally. So they need a lot of paper to actually do that, as some phone call or email still doesn't suffice to call someone up. So supposedly they're already printing the paper slips, but obviously there has been an ongoing crypto mobilization in the past months. So in this regard, nothing much has changed. 500,000 mobilized personnel would obviously be massive. Should it come to that, then we will talk about it in a separate video once this is the case. When it comes to the international support, there was a report by the German newspaper FAZ, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the Frankfurter newspaper, which is issued nationwide. And according to it, Germany has issues even supplying the 40 Marder that it promised, because the ones at the industry are in horrible shape and will take a long time to be refurbished. And the army itself, while it might have close to 300 still in service, it urgently needs them, and a lot of them are being used for spare parts, while roughly only half of them is operational all the time. So we will have to see how many of them will, when they will actually be delivered and where they will come from, whether the German government, the defense ministry, will take them out of the armed forces or from the industry, as it was initially said. And the FAZ also said that anti-tank guided missiles will not be part of the delivery, so it would only deliver the IFV with its autocannon. But in this regard, it uses Milan ATGMs. Those are already in use in Ukraine, and France has donated them in the past, so there might be a way that they can use French Milan if Germany insists on not delivering it in this context. That's already it for now. Not too much happening as of now when it comes to the development on the front lines itself, but would be interesting to know whether you think that Ukraine will be able to recruit enough soldiers, enough personnel to keep up with a Russian mass mobilization, and will Ukraine actually be able to supply them enough to keep them going, which will obviously be a big challenge to when it comes to international support for Ukraine. That's already it from now. As said, if you enjoy this content, please hit the thumbs up button, leave comments for the algorithm, and this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you like to support the channel, please do so with the means in the description, and thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel in this way. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and share the channel with friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.